Hello, my name is Jeffrey Brace, and I am the showrunner of Vintage Computer Festival East. The following interview was done by Brian Stewart on September 16th, 2020. He is interviewing Harry Bawcom, who is one of the layout designers of the 6502 microchip made by MOS Technology.
I have a little bit of vague connection to Harding myself. For a while, I taught at Rhodes College in Memphis, and I was in the math department there. And our math department and Harding and one other school, I think, had kind of a little consortium together.
So you understand Harding then?
Yeah, a little bit at least. I never actually ended up getting a chance to visit the campus, but I know a little bit about the school. How long were you there?
I was just there to freshman, sophomore years, and it was a pre-engineering course, or what I was at.
Mm-hmm.
But I have 120 semester hours of college. I do not have a degree. I transferred to New Mexico State University after the first 2 years. But out of that 120 hours, 20 of them would be religion out of Harding. So it didn't apply to engineering degree.
Right.
Then
so then,
transferred to New
did
Mexico
Motorola
State.
then did Motorola recruit you directly then while you were still a student at New Mexico State?
I don't know what. No, I didn't. I was due to the Vietnam War and the draft and whatever. I dropped out of New Mexico State my senior year, and I took an interim job in northern New Mexico, and I promised them I'd stay there a year. And then after that year, I needed to finish my degree, so I chose either to go back to New Mexico State or any other large town. I think I had looked at Denver and Phoenix to get a job. And so when I went to Phoenix, a friend's relative was an employee at Motorola there. And to make a long story short, he hired me there. And no, I was not recruited by Motorola from college.
I see. And so then, when was that? When did you start at Motorola?
That would be 1969.
Okay. So that was a few years before the 6800 work and
yes,
the
I was
migration.
Yes, I was I hired into a bipolar, I guess it was a T²L type of semiconductor design. But shortly before I was there, the semiconductor wafers were 1/2 inch in diameter. And then they went to 1 inch. And I think at the beginning of my deal there, they had finally got up to a 3-inch diameter semiconductor wafer. So it's at the very beginning of Motorola's semiconductor research.
Yeah, that's it's really kind of wild to think about just the idea of the wafers getting so much bigger over time. It's been pretty amazing, and of course the feature size is getting so much smaller. It's mind blowing. So
yes, I had no idea.
Were you
what was coming?
then starting out doing? Yeah.
I just happened to fall into layout. I could do it.
So when you started at Motorola, was that in then IC layout?
Yes, it was.
So back in those days when you all were doing layout, now I've never done chip layout, though I did take a course in grad school that we spent a lot of time drawing out the little pictures on graph paper with the different colored highlighters. Getting so much. So you were putting together these masks. Um, was that done with just kind of black tape?
No,
Yeah.
no, the drawings were made on
So
what they called stabling. It was a mylar with a grid on it, and it had a rough surface to where the pencils could leave a mark on it, and it was called stabling because dimensionally it was more stable than paper, and so that's why it was used for mylar. Then the drawings were taken to at the time that I was there, the drawings were digitized to cut a rubylith, which was a mylar with a red coating on it, and then depending on whether you wanted it clear or red, the people in the mask shop pulled off the red pieces to make the pattern. So the transistor was drawn on the stabling. The stabling was taken to another department, the mask shop, and they made the various layers from the markings on the stabling. It was all a manual operation.
interesting. That's it's pretty amazing to imagine doing thousands of transistors that way.
It is, but and then they took the large rubylith things and they put it on a horizontal camera. The camera itself was on a vibration isolation mount so that passing trains and cars didn't shake the thing. And it was a huge room with that camera was in, and they would take a picture of that rubylith, and that's eventually that got down to making a mask, which was I can't remember exactly what the scale of the final of the mask was. Probably 20 times larger than the die or whatever, something like that. I can't remember all of that. But
well, it has been a while. I know sometimes I have trouble remembering what happened yesterday.
So it was all a manual process. There was the advantage I had was I started in the bipolar situation deal where metal, where the chips were single layer metal, and so because of that, you had to use your head a little bit to try and get circuitry together. You could use some semiconductor structures to tunnel, if you know what I mean, to cross leads with. But certain leads, of course, you couldn't put that resistance in or capacitance. And so because of that, you had to really organize your the original schematic so that you could complete it. Well, as times went on, you had the 6502 was the technology was MOS. And essentially NMOS had the equivalent of 2.5 layers of interconnect. And so it didn't take quite the organization ability to make that work. But my and people that were only trained in NMOS didn't have to improve their organization, whatever. And so, anyhow, I, for whatever reason, toward the end of the Motorola 6800 project, I transferred into it. And I wasn't, I was, the schematics for a bipolar chip were very simple compared to the huge schematics for NMOS. You know, the entire microchip is a pretty large schematic at that time. And so as I went off to the into that department, they didn't think much of the guy that worked with the little small schematics, because they were the geniuses with the schematics that took several pages.
Mm.
And so I was just off to the side there. Chuck Peddle was the central person on the design of the 6800. There was a more of the management level of it. Of course, he was the architect of how the whole thing went. There was a John Buchanan that was the design leader on it. Anyhow, the Motorola project was over budget, behind, all sorts of problems. And Chuck was keeping track with kind of a PERT chart sort of a thing, trying to, with the NMOS chips, you divided them up into areas for each person to work on. And so Chuck had a chart in his office, and one day they were looking at it in their desperate troubles to get the 6800 completed, and they realized that this little guy from the other department had an output of 5 times what the local guys were. And like I say, my peers didn't. There were 7 other people involved in the layout of the 6800, and my peers didn't pay much attention to me, but they were in desperate trouble, and so they. The exact dates at all. It was around Christmas, and Chuck came to me right before the Christmas holidays, and said, "We've got to get this thing done." And he said, not telling anybody else what happened, what was going to happen. He said, if I give you one guy, can you work through these holidays and get this thing done? And so I volunteered to do that. I picked one guy, and starting into the holidays, we worked night and day, and we finished it out. One of the engineers afterward, Rod Orgill, had said that if we hadn't done that, it would have taken another month to finish it. But anyhow, it was an extreme effort, and and the Monday after the holiday was the day that the head of Motorola, which is a pretty big thing. I mean, you're looking at 100,000 employee company plus, and he was to come to town and check on the and they desperately needed that chip done when he arrived. And so about on the Monday morning, the whole thing was only about 3 or 4 days, as I remember it. But on that morning, about 2 o'clock, we wrapped it up. We had it done. The layout was complete, and at 2 o'clock or whatever, I was done. I went home, and that was probably a major mistake. But anyhow, when all the guys, the other 7 other guys, the entire crew came in on Monday morning, the chip was done. And they were just absolutely dumbfounded. And since I was the guy that nobody respected off in the corner, it was quite a shock. And so that morning, later in the morning, Bob Galvin, who was the president of Motorola, came through the department. And by the time that he had gotten there, they had plots of the entire chip. It was true that some of it was just hand sketched into the plot. The plots were made by a pen plotter called a Zinetics thing, and it was magnetic driven pens. Anyhow, they had enough show and tell for him. It wasn't all legit, and it hadn't been checked and all that sort of a thing. And so that morning, and when I came in about 2 in the afternoon, after you could have heard a pin drop, you know, but so far as Motorola was concerned, I got no credit for that. I mean, it wasn't mentioned to the president, to the CEO of the company, that I had put that thing together. It wasn't to their advantage to do that. And so it would have been more to my advantage to have stayed the morning.
I can definitely see that.
That relates quite a bit to the 6502, because the next, during that time, Chuck was constantly browbeating the management that he wanted a cheaper chip, but so he finally, after the 6800 went into production, it was sold for what, $300 or something like that, which is a lot of money back if you compare it to modern day equivalent. And so he finally talked him into making a smaller, cheaper chip. And so they hired a layout designer from California, as a consultant, to bring him in to, that's right. He wasn't from California. He was working at the Geneva, Switzerland facility. That's what it was. And they were going to, and he had the reputation of being the best of the best. And so they were going to bring him over to Phoenix and to put together this small chip. The management at Geneva would not let him go unless somebody replaced him. So they sent me over to Switzerland. You know, the end result, the proof, when by the time it all settled out, I was better than he was, but they didn't know that. And so anyhow, I went to Switzerland for 10 weeks while Chuck and the design team were working on this smaller, cheaper Motorola 6800. They didn't get it finished, and they canceled it. When I got back, it was looking at the layout, it was half done.
Mm.
And so, but it was a nice trip to Switzerland. And
Yeah,
so,
I can't complain about getting to see Switzerland.
no, that was kind of a reward for my efforts there, even though I didn't get the credit.
Yeah.
It felt good. And so, shortly after that department was going to move to Austin, Texas. And I wasn't going to go to Austin, Texas. So I transferred out of that department to another department. And the engineer there was the guy that founded Micron, the memory deal in Boise, Idaho. This was before he started it.
Right.
Anyhow, so I was working with them. And I had planned a 2-week motorcycle trip to Alaska, and so I took off for Alaska. It was in the late spring, summer, June sometime, and when I got back to Motorola, I had a call from Chuck. To everybody else had already gone to Norristown, Pennsylvania, but he wanted to know if I would go, and it wasn't really an argument to me. I sure. I mean, it was a good time to see the East Coast and all that sort of a thing. So I just tied my motorcycle to the back of a Ford Falcon and headed out. I think they sent a check for $3,500 to get my butt up there. Any way I wanted to do it. And I lived out in the desert at Phoenix in a mobile home where you had to haul the water. I had a water tank out there. I did have power. I didn't have phone. And so I just locked up my trailer and my mobile home and headed east. And that was a very fortuitous thing, because all of the memorabilia or whatever you want to call it that you pick up from work, I was in my mobile home out in the desert there, and I did not load it into the car. I didn't take it. I didn't have much, but anyhow, various layout drawings and things like that, things you accumulate when you work, was there at home. So I had no problem. And so I headed out to Norristown, Pennsylvania. And Chuck had put, you probably know the whole story. I mean, he chose 2 people of every skill. There were 2 layout designers. There were two logic engineers, 2 architects, computer architects. Not that I understand what that word means, but a little bit I do. And then there were 2 managers, Chuck Peddle, Terry Holt. Terry Holt was to be the product engineer. And so we got there and got to work. And Rod Orgill, Will Mathis was the architect. I guess he and Chuck worked together. design this, basically design the functions of the 6502. Rod Orgill took the I don't know what the output is of a computer architect, but he took his output to design the logic for the entire chip. And then I and Mike took the logic diagrams and drew and finished up the chip. Now the key to the whole thing was that it took 7 man-years for Motorola to build to lay out the 6800. It was 7 people for a year, and the 6502 was complete within a year from the people arriving there. And so, and when it hit the news after that, Motorola was pretty taken aback. And I know you've seen some of the ads for the 6502, and it was sticking your finger in the face of Motorola, to put it mildly. And so they took it personal, and they sued. And I don't know that Brian can or the Jeffrey can has a copy of the lawsuit, but the first portions of the lawsuit are based on the layout. And the only way we could have possibly completed that in much less time than they had was to have stolen it, taken it with us. And so the speed of completion of the layout was the heart of the main thrust of the lawsuit. Now, there are other engineering things in there that I don't understand, but it was further down in the lawsuit. But there are some things there that I'm not aware of. But it was the speed of the completion of the layout of the chip that made them certain that we had stolen it. And so MOS Technology was pretty much a primitive company. And so when the lawsuit arrived, we opened up the package, and there was this beautiful 8x10 picture of the 6502. And we just cheered because we didn't have any way to make such a beautiful picture. And my initials and Mike's were on the chip. And so anyhow, we were in, I didn't realize it at the time, but we was in some personal risk there. I mean, the lawyers hired by the company, they were defending the company. They weren't, if they weren't going to defend me. So anyhow, so we, Motorola hired their Philadelphia lawyer, which is, you know, it's kind of a phrase really, but, and we hired our Philadelphia lawyer, and we went and we were told to bring in everything that we had from Motorola. And so we did that, and engineers more than me, I guess, they had all sorts of technical books and design notebooks and that sort of a thing. And so they had we all brought it into a certain, into a room there, and behind our name, we were to put all the stuff? Well, there were stacks of books and technical things 2 or 3 feet high and behind some of the other people's names. And I didn't realize it till years later, but anyhow, Mike, the other layout guy, was the greatest violator. And as Chuck said to me years later, he said, that guy cost me $1 million. It was just too expensive to defend all of all the stuff that he had. And he said, if it had happened today, courts and juries and things like that would be more technically oriented, and they could have defended it. But back then, they had to give up. So
that was the suit that ended
a little
up
bit, but making them pay a royalty for every chip produced. Now, what happened is that, and I happened to hear the conversation, but the first legal bill came in and it was $400,000. Well, Motorola had its own legal department, and they knew it was a little company. They didn't need to go to court. All they had to do was just keep the legal bills going till the company was done. And so anyhow, everybody had a tall stack of stuff behind their name on this table that they had brought from Motorola. And they got to my name, and there was a little badge there. That's all I had. So I went through the discovery thing into the attorney's office in Philadelphia. And he pulls, and they wanted to, he wanted to know how come I had that badge. What he was trying to prove is that I had gone back to Phoenix, gone into Motorola, picked up some stuff and whatever. Anyhow, it was kind of a ridiculous thing. I told him, no, I had trouble keeping track of badges, and they weren't very restrictive to them. So you lose one, you get a duplicate, and your other one comes back in the mail or falls out of the laundry, or you find it in the car seat, you know. And so I turned the badge in when I left, you know, but there were several others that were just hanging around so that when I get up in the morning, I could grab one and get my butt to work. And so I still have the badge to this day. It has exhibit number such and such on it. And anyhow, after I told him a story about it falling out of the laundry, that was the end of my interview with the lawyers. But what they were trying to do is they wanted to prove that we had stolen the layout. Well, we didn't. I had my skill, and I had done one. The two tips are similar, and there was certainly a lot of advantage to being the second one going.
Right. So, yeah, you could bring your experience from the first one.
Yes, and it made a big difference. So anyhow, for me, that was the end of the lawsuit. I wasn't privy to what other problems and what other people's interviews were. They didn't talk to me about it, and whatever. And so anyhow, he started selling them at $25 a pop, and we got that full color, which is a big thing in 70, 75, 76, when we had our picture on the front page of Electronic Engineering News and Times. And so anyhow, things progressed but the work environment wasn't. Mike was a very manipulative person, and Bill was very susceptible to manipulation, and so the political world for me wasn't doing too well, and so I had to get out of there. And an engineer I used to work with had transferred to DEC. DEC was a big company at the time. And he's looking through the mic. DEC is trying to do the same thing. They're trying to make a microprocessor chip. And so he's looking through the microscope to the chip, and he sees the initials down there. And he says, man, I know the dude. Make a long story short, I got a call from DEC. And I needed to get out of MOS Technology. The job was done. And so I don't know, at the time, anybody that I knew that messed with computers played Pong. And I saw no future in Pong. And so I guess I would have been better off to have hitched my wagon to these geniuses that I had been working with. But anyhow, I didn't see it that way. So I moved to DEC. DEC was really messed up. I can remember one time that they couldn't get a chipset together to make their PC. I can remember the fab telling the engineering guys, I can't take any more chip designs. We're too busy trying to make the ones we have work with match-ins and corrections and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And it looked like a futile effort to me. And it was just, Chuck deserves a lot of credit for putting together an engineering team that could do what it did as quickly as it did it, and then make it work first time. Mm-hmm. You know, making it work first time, everybody gets credit for that. Everybody that was on the team, because there's no DRC programs, there's no logic checking programs. Mm-hmm. It's all coloring plots and using coloring to guide your mind and eye for checking. And so at the time, I sent a letter to a manager I had worked for at Motorola, and I told him that I didn't. DEC didn't look like it was going to make it to me, and I wrote him, says, keep me in mind, because in 6 months or in a year or so, I'd like to come back. And I got a phone call a few days later after I mailed the letter that said, come back now. And so it was very embarrassing to me to quit DEC after eight months, but it just wasn't going to go. And of course, right after that, after I left, I don't know what all happened to DEC, but it basically folded into something. Was sold or something. Anyhow, it went from the top of the line in computer design to nothing. So it was very fortunate for me to do that. But and some people ask, very surprised that I was the only one of the 8 to return to Motorola. And after the lawsuit, and the lawsuit based on the layout, how did that happen? Well, I knew that if this manager would hire me, it would be my only chance to come back to Motorola. And the half-life of a manager at Motorola was, you know, measured months, really. I mean, they come and they go. And so if I had property, I had a place to live in Phoenix, and I was tired of freezing my butt off in Boston. And so as bad as I don't know, what do you call it, unethical or whatever, I was really embarrassed to quit after 8 months. But I did. And while that 8 months that I was there, I bought a little airplane. I bought a Cessna 150. And so the day after I got my license, I had bought the airplane without knowing how to fly. Will Mathis and Will had about 300 hours, and so the deal was that he and I would fly to Arkansas, and I would get him an airplane ticket to fly back, and then I would fly the plane on to Arizona. My parents at the time had retired and were living in Searcy. My father had a long tie-in with Harding College, which is now Harding University or whatever. But anyhow, so Will helped me fly it to. It's just kind of a tough trip. I just felt better if to take Will, who's more experienced with me. So I flew back to Phoenix, and I worked in a digital department there. The manager that hired me didn't care about politics. And within 6 months, he had got busted, and there was a long story behind that, but it's not relevant. And so, but through all the ups and downs of the semiconductor industry, I retained my employment all the way to age 65. I had no peers that survived in their job to 65. Almost everybody was cut. How do you call it? Early retirement. I mean, Motorola was on the downhill run. It's kind of a common thing for the electrical engineers to be furloughed early, whatever. But one of the questions that was asked was, how come they hired me back? And the basic reason is that I was very good at my job of layout. Now, layout's not a job anymore. Computers do it. But I was typically faster, more accurate, and my chips tended to have a good yield. It's kind of like an artist, you know. You can't put your finger on exactly why, but Michelangelo's pretty damn good. And so I was very good at my job, even though that job doesn't exist anymore. And that's why they hired me back. And I did good work for them for quite a few years. And when the layout function faded away, I got into the interface between the chip design and the mask shop sort of a thing. And I was good enough at it to stay employed. But looking back on it, it's almost a miracle. So, and I had no clue of the big picture. I mean, Chuck Peddle, but I didn't realize what was coming. I mean, you know, what cell phones came on in 95 or whatever, 90, 95. This was 75. I had, and what we did is, everybody I know has a cell phone. You go into a restaurant and there's 4 people sitting there working on their phones, and then I'm talking through an iPad right now. I had no clue, and it would have been nice to have made some money out of it, but and there's one other thing that I called, I wrote Chuck a letter, probably about 15 years ago, and just told him thanks for the experience or whatever. Anyhow, it was a good thing for me. And because after arriving in Phoenix and flying to fly 50 around the Southwest, because you've got mountains and high temperatures and things like that. And when you pull back on the yoke, it goes down. It doesn't go up. It doesn't have the power. So trying to solve that problem, I built my own airplane. I built a Burt Rutan Long Easy. It's a 200-mile-an-hour cross-country airplane. And that basically was the center of my life, because I put a motor home in Durango, Colorado, when Phoenix was 115. On Friday evening, I would take off. I would land just before sunset at Durango. And on Monday morning, just after sunup, I'd scrape the frost off the wings sometimes and land in Phoenix, where it was about 95 at sunrise. So we did that. The wife and I did that all summer long. And it's a heritage to it now. I'm in Silverton, Colorado now. And we're in the middle of the fall colors. Anyhow, I got the best of both worlds. Phoenix is a pretty good place to be 7 months out of the year. But the other 5, it's hell on earth. And so it worked for me. And talking to Chuck, he explained what all had happened to him, I guess. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, he worked, night and day, traveled a lot and stuff. And his wife finally had enough of him. So his wife took his money, married the neighbor, and moved to Reno. And so I don't know all the details of that, but and then Chuck has too bad he's passed now. He's got a lot of stories too, because at one time he was Steve Jobs' jogging partner, and he had a period of employment at Apple. So Chuck's career was a whole lot more interesting than mine. One other story he told me was that he and the head of Commodore, I can't remember his name now.
Tramiel?
Say again?
Jack Tramiel?
Tramiel, yeah. He and Tramiel went to this little garage in a residential area. I don't know, where was it? Anyhow, it was Steve Jobs' daddy's garage. And they went in there, and as they're walking down the driveway, Chuck tells the deal that Jobs offered them was, for $100,000, you could have what they had if you would give Wozniak and Jobs a job. And Chuck was of the opinion that it was a good deal. Tramiel, as they're walking down the driveway, said it was too much. And so they did not buy Apple for $100 grand. and Chuck said to Tramiel, he says, you know, they're ahead of us. They took the 6502 and they were ahead of making a computer out of it, ahead of Commodore. And that was the comment that stuck to me. You know, they're ahead of us. Anyhow, I think it was Chuck's idea that it was a good deal. They should pay the $100 and 100,000 and take what Wozniak, Jobs, and whatever they had. But they didn't, and Apple is what it is, and Commodore is what it is. But they did have a good run, I think. Mm-hmm. I never owned a Commodore, but anyhow, at one time it was one of the largest personal computer things, weren't they?
Yeah, the Commodore 64 was, at least at one time, the largest selling single model that there had been. It may actually still hold that record. I'm not sure.
But anyhow, it's and of course it used the 6502. Mm-hmm. The completion of it, the 6501 and 6502, they're both the same chip. But the 6501 is an absolute duplicate of the 6800. And in the ads, you as Chuck was poking his finger at Motorola, he says, we're not ready yet. You can read it in one of the ads. We're not ready yet. You get a 6800 and plug it in your socket. And when you do your design, and ours will fit right in later when we get it done. And part of the settlement was that the exact duplicate of the 6800, the 6501, could not be sold. And so that's why you never hear of a 6501. And as I understand it, there's only one pad difference. I don't know the details on it. You know, I'm not a computer architect kind of guy, but that's the difference. And the 6502 is not pin compatible with the 6501, but it is essentially the same chip. Same masks, all of it. You just leave a pad off or add one. I don't know which it is. And so that's pretty much the summary. I never expected Motorola to fade to nothing. Mm-hmm. But to their credit, they did not go through bankruptcy. But that's a selfish thing too, because if they had, the family would have lost their value too if they had gone through bankruptcy. I lost a third of a pension because of Motorola going the way it did, but there's other horror stories. Polaroid to me is the worst. As I understand, Polaroid just pulling numbers out of the air. You know, you got a $6 billion company and it's got $6 billion of a liability for pension. And so they had more ethics than they sold it. And so a guy buys it for you know, 400 billion or whatever it was. And then he kills the pension, gets rid of it through bankruptcy. He takes it through bankruptcy, gets rid of the pension liabilities, and then he sells it for $6.5 billion. So he walked off with everybody else's pension. That's what could have happened to Motorola, but it didn't. I'm not sure. I don't have any idea what the numbers actually are, how much Polaroid sold for, or whatever. But anyhow, that's to me worst case. I don't know what happened to the deck pinchings and that sort of a thing. But anyhow, it worked out for me.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I'm curious about that brief stint at DEC. So was that the LSI 11 chipset you were working on?
It was a PDP-11 or the follow-on to the PDP-11 at DEC. When I was there, the team leader called it the Fonz. That was his name. That was a project of it because the TV program was strong at the time, and so
right.
And so I think it was a follow-on. Wasn't it a follow-on to the PDP-11?
Yeah, it was. It's basically a reduction of a TTL PDP-11 down into a small MOS chipset.
That's what I was hired to do at DEC. Yes.
And they did eventually do it, but it sounds like it was quite a trying time for them.
Yes, and it was just an absolute disaster as I was looking at it. I mean, if the fab, and I don't know where the problem was, whether it was design or fab, but looking at it, you have to give Chuck a whole lot of credit for being able to put together a design team, and Pavinin or the company, MOS Technology, because they developed the process at the same time. And they did it, and it worked.
Yeah, in less than a year.
In a year, yes, it was a year. And like I say, just the layout at Motorola was 7-man years. And so, and there's other things involved in it too. I mean, if you can imagine you being in a company, sitting there doing your job, and all of a sudden these come walking in the door and going to save the world. So you got to give the company itself, the people we worked with and all, some credit for dealing with that. And we weren't the most user-friendly guys. I remember at my departure party at MOS Technology, there were a lot of MOS Technology employees there. So that was to my credit. I was really surprised. So there were others of us that pissed them off from the get-go. So,
yeah, I've heard that there was a certain amount of resistance from the existing MOS Technology employees when you all arrived.
right, and anyhow, I was well accepted, I think. And so I don't think there's any animosity toward me, but there is to some. And when it comes to the total integration of management and things, I have no insight as to how that went. And nor do I have any idea how things faded away after I left. I was the first employee to leave.
And you left in late 75, is that right?
Late 76.
76, okay. So that was right about the time then that Commodore was taking over.
It was before Commodore took over. They were putting together that deal, and nobody tried to get me to stay or anything. I mean, my job was done, and so they were. And after that, Commodore bought, I guess, MOS Technology. Is that how it happened?
I believe so, yes.
And so I had no No, I have no insight to that. I wasn't involved in it at all. And so it was kind of a surprise to get a call from the girl in California, Terry Holt's daughter, who put together the website. And she's right. Bill has taken all the credit for all of it, and he doesn't deserve it. And so this is a space for the rest of us to give our story. There's a website on the net that titles Bill is the greatest layout designer in the world for designing the 6502. He didn't do it. I did, with the help of two others. And so I wrote into that website, and they did post my comments, but then they say, well, Bill did the 6501 and the other guy did the 6502. It's the same chip. You just remove a pad. But anyhow, and that's why they can't, Ray Hurt and Bill were to go together to as equal partners to found the Western Design Center. Well, Bill isn't going to be partners with anybody, and so after that got going, then the other guy had to leave. I had another comment or two on that. Now, Bill deserves the credit for what he's done with the 6502 at Western Design Center. From that time on, they had to put new chip designs together, different technologies and stuff, and they made it work. And so he deserves the credit that he's earned. But it's pretty low for him to have to take everybody else's also. And I'm sure that's one reason why Ray Hurt and if you look at the book that what's the guy's, I can't remember his name, the Commodore book, the biography about Commodore. What's the title of it? Commodore. There's a second part to the title. Anyhow, he really diminished other people's involvement in the 6502. And when I was mentioned in there, Bill says, I don't know where he is. I don't know where he went to. Well, Bill did know. I lived in Phoenix, same as Bill did. He knew exactly where I was, but he didn't want the author to interview and get another perspective as to how the whole thing went. But Bill designed the PIA. He did not design the 6502, but he was instrumental in it getting into production error-free. We all worked on that. And he gets the credit for whatever the Western Design Center has done from that time on. But yeah, I resent him and Rod Orgill has passed. And so he can't, but Rod was a pretty laid back kind of guy, so he wouldn't have made a big issue of it, I don't think. But I do. and I'm sure Ray Hurt has some strong opinions because he wouldn't respond to Jennifer.
Interesting. Well, it's you know, sometimes when a group of people are involved in something so intense and so groundbreaking, you know.
And there were all the people were talented people.
Yeah.
And so they were exceptional. But I didn't really figure it out till later. But Bill is a short guy with high lift shoes. And it's just the Napoleon complex. He caused a lot of problem at MOS. but he has made his company work, I presume, and he deserves the credit that he deserves, but he doesn't need to take everybody else's. And so it's nice of Jennifer to give the rest of us because without Jennifer, everybody would have thought that the 6502 was Bill's chip. It is not. Never was. So I was going to be interested to hear his speech at your gathering there as to what he was going to say.
Yeah, it turns out that Jeff had me interviewing Bill yesterday. So we've got a recording of Bill and, yeah, so we've got the two of you.
Is he taking credit for the entire chip?
He did talk a lot about other people's involvements. To be honest, I'd have to sit down and rewatch and take some notes to see exactly what he had to say about who. But the sense I got was that he did recognize that it was a team effort and that there were a lot of people involved. There were certainly aspects of it that I think he does claim some credit for, and those may well be things that he primarily did. Things like including the on-chip clock and the decimal adjust stuff, but.
And of course, I have no insight to that.
Yeah, those were more in the design side. But in terms of the layout stuff, I don't remember him really saying anything in our conversation yesterday where he talked much about the layout of the 6502 itself.
And if you look at the timeline, you will find that he was a junior engineer back in those days. He was a junior engineer at Motorola.
Mm-hmm.
And as the rest of us at the other side of the room were putting together the 6502, he was working on the PIA, which is the same chip he designed at Motorola, what a peripheral interface adapter, whatever.
Right. Yeah, the 6820 at Motorola.
That's the PIA?
Yeah, it was 6820, and then they had a 6821 that, as far as I can tell, is just a slight enhancement of the 6820. And then the one at MOS Technologies had a little more functionality, but it had a lot of the same core mechanisms as the 6820 did.
It would be interesting if you could interview Will Mathis. I mean, he deserves a lot of credit because certain signals in the chip had to get to certain parts of the chip before other signals and all that sort of thing. He had to sort all of that out. I joked with him once that he's walking down the hall and he's got the left hand high and the right hand low and trying to figure out what signal is where because there was no computer simulation.
Mm-hmm.
It was all done manually, and he did it, and it worked. And so he was a very important part of getting the whole thing together. But you've got a lot of other companies had trouble with fabs and process. And so whoever was responsible for that is, and we digitized it with punch cards. I mean, the entire chip was on a several foot long stack of IBM punch cards. And then when they wanted to make an edit to it, they'd have to go chase down the punch card that they needed to change. And so those guys, the guys that did that, deserve a lot of credit. And then the people we worked with that had to put up with us, You know, they deserve some credit for that too. But they were working on scientific calculators. That was a dead end. And so if somebody, the company management realized that they were at the end of their road on making calculators, chips. And so that's why this all happened. So it's too bad we can't, I'd like to have talked to Chuck a little bit. He talked a little bit about his interface with Jobs, but when Jobs had no use for him anymore, he just kind of threw him to the trash heap, sort of a thing. I think he had stock options at Apple, but I don't think he was able to exercise them.
Oh.
And your wife taking your money and marrying a neighbor is that's the epitome of defeat, isn't it?
Yes, that is. That's rough. Oh my. Well, you know,
As
you
I
certainly have
understand
had.
it, USB 3 is Chuck's. Is that correct?
You know, I honestly don't know for sure. I know that he had done some work on an interface that is very similar to what ended up being USB. And whether his work was directly influential of it or not, I really don't know. But it's certainly possible.
Amazing guy, and I wish I had understood what was to come at the time. but I had no clue. I really
Well,
didn't.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think anybody can ever know for sure. And, you know, some people happen to, some don't.
But he knew he knew what he was after, and I'm sure it exceeded even what he expected. But he was still way had an insight as to what was to come. So,
yeah, everything I've heard, he was quite an interesting fellow, and I'm sorry that I never knew him.
well, that's all the stories that I can remember at the moment.
Well, I've certainly enjoyed speaking with you, and I certainly admire what you have done and the skills you developed, and you were certainly there at a very pivotal time, and played a big role in it. And it's been an honor to talk with you.
Thank you. And if they ever get a gathering there, I will show up.
All right. Well, I will definitely pass that on.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's been good talking to you, and have a good rest of the day there, and hope you're having good weather out there.
Perfect. Blue skies, fall colors, tall pines, and I'm at an altitude now of 9,300 feet.
Oh wow!
So winter's coming.
Well, yes. So I will leave you with have fun enjoying it, and
thank you. And I'm impressed
well.
with all the books in your environment there.
Yes, I have. I basically have not let go of any of the books that I had when I was in school or graduate school or teaching, and I've accumulated quite a lot. So yeah, I've got a little library down here in my basement.
A friend of mine was cleaning out his house. He had to move, and he had the manual for Windows 95.
Oh, yeah.
He decided maybe he didn't need to keep that. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.